Welcome back. We're in Module 2, the legal basis of the music business, and we are now going to start talking about royalties. In particular, we're going to talk about mechanical royalties, which I like to subtitle this lesson, Show Me the Money. I'm not going to jump up and down like an idiot when I say that though, because that would be a bit unnecessary. All right, so what is a music royalty? Well, it's a payment that goes to recording artists, songwriters, composers, publishers, other copyright owners for the use of their intellectual property. And of course, we know that the intellectual property we're talking about is copyright. Dare I say it one more time? I shall. Copyright in songs and copyright in sound recordings. So what we're going to focus on in this particular lesson is songs and songwriters, and one particular form of royalty that is payable to songs and songwriters called the mechanical royalty. There are others, public performance income, synchronization income, and print income. We're going to talk about all those in due course to a greater or lesser extent. But this one, mechanical income, is a particularly important royalty payable to songwriters. In fact, if you're a songwriter, in all likelihood, this will be your predominant form of income. So it's pretty important that you understand that. All right. So where does this concept of mechanical income come from? Well, we've said it before and we're going to say it again. One of the rights of the copyright owner is the right to be paid when your work is reproduced. Now, by reproduction, when we talk about a song, the main way that a song is reproduced is by somebody making a recording of that song, and then that recording is reproduced. It's kind of a two-step process. Somebody records the song, and then when there is a reproduction of a recording made, by definition, there is also a reproduction of the song. Now, this is income payable to songwriters. Look, I've even put it in bold on the PowerPoint to make it really stand out to you. This is songwriters' income. This is not about the reproduction of the sound recording, although the payment to the songwriter comes via the reproduction of the sound recording. So if I wrote a song, that song is recorded and 1 million copies of that recording are made. That's also 1 million copies of the song being made. And so that is the key point here. Mechanical royalties are payable to songwriters. In fact, they're payable to songwriters by the people that make the sound recording. It's an expense of the maker of the sound recording. All right, so I've probably already started on this explanation, but let's answer that question. Mechanical royalties are royalties that are generated each time a musical composition is reproduced, and that includes whether it's reproduced physically or digitally, whether it's on-demand streaming or whether it's a download to own form of digital reproduction. Now, let's go back to the history of mechanical income and explain why it got such a weird name. In the days of physical reproduction of recordings, in order to manufacture a copy of a sound recording, you needed a machine. Pretty obvious. You did not have a mechanical reproduction or a machine reproduction of a recording without a machine making a CD or making a vinyl album or a cassette. So because a machine was required, the idea was that the royalty would be payable when that machine spat out an additional copy of that recording. In order to spit out that recording, they had to pay for an ingredient in that recording, and that ingredient was the song. So every time a mechanical reproduction of a recording was made, a royalty was payable to the songwriter called a mechanical royalty. Now, we hit the 21st century. It happened a while ago now. We've been in it for quite some time. And in that century, we've had things like iTunes and more recently streaming services like Spotify, Apple Music, etc. Now, you could argue, well, my song's no longer being reproduced. There's no copy of my song being made. It's one audio recording and everyone's listening to the same recording. It's not being reproduced. Fortunately, the lawmakers around the world recognise that, well, that's not really going to work. The songwriter can't afford to write a song and only get paid once, the one time it's reproduced in a recording. They need to get paid every time that recording is exploited. And so fortunately, mechanical royalties do not become redundant, but the way that they were calculated under a streaming model is obviously quite different to the way that they were recorded under a physical model. So let's have a look at how this calculation is done. If you're an independent artist and you're recording your own songs, you probably think this whole concept is a little bit superfluous. You probably think, why do we need to bother? I'm recording my own songs. I own my own recordings and I'm recording my own songs. Why should I have to pay myself a mechanical royalty? Well, the answer is you actually have to. And now we all know that that's sort of ridiculous, that you're not going to take money out of your left-hand pocket and put it in your right-hand pocket. But effectively, legally, that's exactly what you're doing. As the songwriter, you are wearing your songwriter hat. And the songwriter says, well, I wrote that song. And you, the recording artist, says, well, I want to record that song. And you, the recording artist, has to pay you, the songwriter, for the use of that song. Now, in reality, does that actually happen? Probably not. But the point is that legally, yes, that is an entitlement. Now, if you do somebody else's song, it kind of makes sense. You know, if you're Leonard Cohen and you wrote a song called Hallelujah and Jeff Buckley comes and records your song Hallelujah, you are going to think, if you're Leonard Cohen, well, hang on, I'm entitled to get paid. And probably Jeff Buckley would think I'm quite happy to pay Leonard for the use of his song because it's a bloody great song. So that idea of separating the two copyrights, we're already familiar with from doing this course. But even a singer-songwriter who records their own songs has to recognise that they actually have two separate copyrights, and you don't want to have to negotiate with yourself. That would be really difficult. How do you negotiate fair value for your song? Okay, well, there is a better system in place. The songwriter, when their song is reproduced, does not need to negotiate individually with that artist or with that record company. Fortunately, the law has stepped in and sets the rate of the mechanical royalty. Now, a lot of people watching this class, just like the Vampr community generally, is a very broad group from a lot of different countries. So I'm not really going to waste too much time on going into the details of how the mechanical royalty is calculated in every country. But what I can tell you is this. It's a percentage of either the retail price or the wholesale price of the container of the recording, or in the case of streaming, it's an amount that is negotiated between the different collection societies and publishers of the world and the streaming platforms. So it does vary country to country, but importantly, it's not a dollar number. It's a percentage. Now, this makes sense because if it was a dollar number, how are you going to put a value on your song? Let's say Leonard Cohen agrees that Jeff Buckley should record his song and Jeff Buckley wants to record the song. Should Leonard charge $10, $1,000, $1 million? Well, that is pretty much impossible before the recording is made to put a valuation on it. So the way that it is calculated is that you get a percentage as the songwriter multiplied by the number of times the song is reproduced. So if you're a songwriter of 1 million selling recording, you get 1 million times that percentage rate. If your recording sells 1 copy, or if the recording sells 1 copy, you, the songwriter, get 1 times the mechanical rate. So that's what a hit song is to a songwriter. A song that is reproduced multiple times and they get multiple times the mechanical royalty rate. All right. Now, that would become problematic if you're a songwriter and your song is being recorded by lots and lots of different people. Do you really have the time? Does Leonard Cohen really have the time to chase up everyone that is doing a recording of Hallelujah? There's 100 people have done recordings of Hallelujah. You know, and many other songs are in the same category. So, if you had that problem, do you just give up and go, oh, it's impossible. I'm never going to be able to collect all my mechanical royalties. This concept of mechanical royalties, great in theory, not so good in practice. Well, no, of course not. There are collection societies that have been set up to collect mechanical income on behalf of all the songwriters. There are collection societies that have been set up to collect all the income on behalf of all the songwriters. Some of these you've heard of. In Australia, it's called AMCOS, the Australian Mechanical Copyright Owners Society. In the US, the Harry Fox Agency, or MLC, that's what they do. You become a member of a mechanical royalty collection society, and those mechanical royalties are collected on your behalf by that collection society. So again, if you are a member of your local mechanical copyright society, you don't really need to worry about how your mechanicals are being collected. They will be collected if you are a member of those organisations, which of course you should be. All right, so let's have a look at the mechanical rate. In the digital world, just to give you a bit of an idea, and I know I said, you know, they're different from country to country, and I'm literally not going to go through every country, but for those of you in the US, which is probably the majority of the audience, in mechanical or digital reproduction in the US, the rate is based like this. Mechanical royalties are generated on a per unit basis, of course, and that is based on each individual physical reproduction or download, and the songwriter in that situation gets 9.1 cents per song. For tracks over 5 minutes long, it goes up to 1.75 cents per minute. Now, obviously, that's not a huge amount if you release a song and it gets streamed once or downloaded twice, or you sell 3 copies at your shows. It's not going to add up to much money for the songwriter. But multiply that by 1 million copies and suddenly you might be looking at a significant amount. Now, in the streaming area, for streaming services, mechanical royalties are thrown in together with public performance income. Now, at this point, I'm probably losing a few of you, and I understand why. It's a little bit complicated, but there is a certain amount of confusion with streaming. Is that a public broadcast, which it is, it's broadcast into the ears of the people that are listening, or is it a reproduction? So rather than have that argument, the collection societies around the world negotiated with the streaming platforms, and they have what's known as an all-in royalty pool. Now in the US, that all-in royalty pool is 11.8% of the streaming platform's total revenue. So if you are Spotify, you are obliged to pay 11.8% of your revenue to songwriters, to all the songwriters collectively. There is a plan, there is a suggestion that this percentage, the money going to the songwriters, is going to go up to 15.1% by the end of this year. Well, let's see what happens. Now, what happens is then the public performance income is taken out of this all-in royalty pool, and that leaves around 6 to 7% of that income goes to public performance income, and that goes to ASCAP or BMI in the US. The rest is what's left for the owners of the mechanical copyright, the songwriters. The songwriters will receive around about 4 to 5% of the income generated by songs on streaming platforms. Generated by recordings on streaming platforms. That doesn't feel like a lot, but we'll talk about this in another class. But you put that together with the payment made to the owner of the sound recording, and that's the amount that comes out of the streaming system. Now, there's all sorts of discussions about that. Artists claim, of course, we don't get enough revenue. Songwriters say, we don't get enough revenue. Songwriters who are also artists go, hey, even with between the two forms of income, we don't get enough revenue. And record companies say, well, it's not really our fault because we only get so much from the streaming services. We're not going to go into that whole debate right now, but just so you know, that is how the mechanical rate is calculated on the streaming platform. All right, so I know that was kind of heavy, and by definition it is, and that's why we have collection societies, and that's why we have music industry accountants who specialise in auditing mechanical royalty payouts. So it is complicated. There is no simple way of explaining it, but hopefully you've got the overall picture. All right, let me just finish off this explanation by pointing out the pivotal role of mechanical royalties. Mechanical royalties provide a very significant link between the publishing and the recording industries. Mechanical royalties are a form of revenue for the songwriter. It's how the songwriter gets paid. For the owner of the sound recording, mechanical royalties are an expense. If you're going to make a recording and sell a recording, you've got an expense that comes out of your revenue, and that's the money that you have to pay to those dang songwriters. For the songwriters, it's their income, it's their lifeblood. So there is an adversarial position there. If you're the recording industry, you would rather pay the songwriters as little as possible rather than more. It's an expense to your business, and you would not be a rational business if you said, hey, I'd rather my expenses be more rather than less. Of course you'd prefer your expenses to be less rather than more. So this money's going, it's disappearing, it's going out the door to those pesky songwriters. Is it any wonder why record companies also start publishing companies? Because that way, the money doesn't actually leave the building, it goes to the affiliated publishing company of that record company. So that's why Warner Music has a publishing company, why Sony has a publishing company, why Universal has a publishing company, why a former major label, EMI, had a very big publishing company. It just makes sense. If the money is going to go out the door, you'd rather it just go down the corridor and not off to some person on the other side of the street. So that is the connection between publishing and recording. We're going to talk about publishing contracts, we're going to talk about recording contracts as we go along, but that's just a key bit of basic knowledge. Mechanical income is income for the songwriter and the publisher, and it's an expense for the recording artist and the record company. Okay, so it's a pretty long and involved lesson, this one, and again, I don't really apologize for that. It's important knowledge, and if you are a songwriter, this is your key form of income. It's very important income, and particularly if you end up writing a hit song or a song that gets recorded by a bunch of different people, this is literally life-changing income. So it's very important that you understand it. It's not something you can negotiate. Even if you're the best songwriter in the world, you don't get a better rate of mechanical income than a beginner. What you do get, though, is more mechanical income because your songs are reproduced more times because they're good and people want copies of them. So all songs are equal when it comes to mechanical royalties, but some songs obviously generate more income than others by having more reproductions than other songs. The good news is you don't need to bury yourself in too much detail understanding this. If you have a music publisher, they will do this for you. And if you don't have a music publisher, there is collection societies that will collect your mechanical income for you on your behalf. And of course, that income then finds its way eventually into your pocket. So whilst it's important to understand this, you don't really need to understand the technicalities of the collection process. Fortunately, that is done for you. All right, I know that was a bit of a journey and I understand why, but it's an important journey, and if you do have any questions about this one, definitely go back, have another look at the slides and jump into one of the Vampr rooms and talk to other students about this particular concept. It's really important. All right, thank you very much for hanging in there, and we'll see you in the next class.